Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Santagrossi, President of the League of Women Voters of Champaign County. Tonight, we are going to talk about electing the president by direct popular vote, which really means abolishing the Electoral College. Our presenter is Trisha Crowley. Trisha is the immediate past president and current president emerita of our league. During her career, she was a deputy city attorney for the city of Champaign and a Champaign County assistant state's attorney. Trisha has studied tonight's topic at length, and we are lucky to have her here to explain it to us. Trisha?
Okie doke. First, one of my flaws as a speaker is that I go very fast. And so if you want something slowed down or repeated, just put it in the chat and Ann will give me a nudge or whatever, and I'll try and slow it down a little. This is really interesting stuff. The slides are very informative, but it may take a couple minutes to read them. So if I go too fast, let me know. Also, if you have a question as we're going along, put it in the Q&A and Ann will bring it to my attention, but we will have a Q&A at the end of the meeting where we can discuss the issues and ask questions maybe in greater depth. So.
And Trisha, you mean put it in the chat?
Put it in the chat.
Yeah, cool.
Put it in the chat. Yeah, I've been to too many webinars, I guess. Yeah. These are meetings. We need the chat. Okay. So the question is of great concern right now, isn't it? About how the president is elected and how they should be elected. Nothing we're talking about tonight is going to be able to be changed, right, for 2024, but we can look forward to the future. So the first question I have is a trick question. So how many of us have voted for a president of the United States? You can raise your hands. None of us have ever voted for a president of the United States. We voted for a proxy for an elector who voted for president of the United States. So we don't have a direct system. We have a very, very indirect system with a lot of flaws in it. And I found it very interesting that there isn't a right in the Constitution to vote for the president of the United States. And in fact, they set up a system where the people can't vote for the president of the United States. So let's get going. So the agenda, talk first about what the Electoral College is, and I'm sure all of you have some idea, more or less concrete, but we'll describe it in some detail. Talk about the position of the League of Women Voters on the issue of abolishing. And then we'll get into sort of the nitty-gritty. What is wrong with the Electoral College? Oh, let me count the ways that it's wrong. There are many, many defects, but we'll cover the major ones. There's also people who defend the Electoral College, and we'll talk about why they do that and what kinds of, and the fact that a lot of what they rely on is not based on facts, and so we need to examine that. And then finally, how do we get rid of it? And we'll talk about that at the end. So what is the Electoral College? The words Electoral College don't appear in the Constitution anywhere. It's a term that we use to describe the system that the Constitution talks about or sets up. Right now, the Electoral College is a group of 538 people. We call them electors, and they are the ones who elect the President of the United States. So unless you've been an elector, you haven't voted for the President of the United States. And the number 538 comes from the description in the Constitution, which is the people who are electors are equal to, each state gets a number that's equal to the number of seats they have in the US House and Senate. So a minimum for a state is 3, right? 2 senators and 1 representative. Wyoming, Alaska, some other states have 3. California has 54, 2 senators and 52 members of the House of Representatives. So each state may have different, and there's 3 for the District of Columbia, and that's how we get to 538. These people never meet together. They, after the election, they meet in their state capitals where they certify the election in their state and send it to the President of the Senate. And the Constitution says state legislatures decide how the state will choose electors. In the beginning of our nation, most of the states chose their electors. The state legislature themselves picked them. There wasn't any election at all. A couple of states, New York was one and another one, I forget which it was, did have an election by the people who were eligible to vote. So the method that state legislatures picked moved back and forth, changed sometimes with almost every presidential election, until basically about the end of the 1820s, almost every state, except I think South Carolina, used a popular vote system. So we have the popular vote system, and the number is now 538, but it changed over the course of time as the House of Representatives got bigger. It doesn't get bigger anymore because of the decision in the 20s to keep it number the same. So we have 538, a majority is 270. You need a majority to win. If you don't have 270 or more, there's a default provision for what happens in the case of a tie or a lack of a majority. And the default is the election goes to the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, each state has 1 vote. California has 1 vote. Florida has 1 vote. Delaware has 1 vote. Doesn't matter what the size of the state is. Their delegates, their representatives have 1 vote, and they better decide on what it's going to be, or they won't be able to. They won't have any vote at all. Now this is a dreadful solution, right? We wouldn't want to see that. It's happened once. Happened in 1824. So, I mean, it is possible. I think it would be more, much more upsetting event if it were to happen under current circumstances. So, any questions about the Electoral College? We got anything, Ann? No? Okay. So it's a position of the League of Women Voters that we should abolish the Electoral College and go to a direct popular vote method. The presidential election is virtually the only election in the US that the person with the most votes doesn't necessarily win. But we believe that that's the way it should be. A direct popular vote, the candidate with the most votes would win. So we've had this position since 1970. Not much has happened since 1970 on the issue, but the League has, in its last national convention, decided to make this a priority issue, and they're planning on how, in fact, to advance this issue. And there's much more discussion about it as a result of the 2000 and 2016 election. There are many, many groups that are discussing the issue right now. So what's wrong with the Electoral College? And first, let's go back to why do we have this anyway, right? It will take sort of an exercise in imagination. Put yourself in the place of a delegate of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. One of 55 people. Apparently it was a very hot summer. And their job was to write up a new constitution for the 13 states. And they didn't have a model for what they wanted to do. There wasn't a country out there where things work the way they wanted to plan it to work. And one of the first questions that was raised, and one of the last questions that was decided, was how to elect or select the President of the United States. The first suggestion was the Congress pick the president. And many of the delegates were unhappy with that idea because they've had an example of Congress picking the president in the Articles of Confederation, and the president was a very weak position as a result of owing the office, so to speak, to the people who picked them, the Congress. The idea of a national popular vote was also raised many times during the discussion. There were several delegates who were very, very strongly in favor of it. The problem is that the southern states were never going to accept that. And the reason is pretty obvious, right? The population of the North and the South may have been somewhat pretty much the same, but obviously a significant amount of people in the South were enslaved people, and they weren't going to vote, right? If you had a national popular vote with the majority, or with the people with the most votes to win, the North would have significant control. And so the Southern states essentially blocked any kind of solution that involved the national popular vote. Early on in the session, the structure of the bicameral legislature, the House and the Senate, was decided. Senate was two people, two for each state, not proportional, in other words, but the House was to be proportional to the amount of people in the country. And the number of each state's representatives in the House of Representatives was determined after each census. And in the census, the Constitution says that every enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a free person. In other words, the South was getting a bump for those people, even though they weren't going to be voting. So the House would represent the South with more than its voters would have this extra number of representatives because of counting the slaves in the census. And that compromise in the House of Representatives was decided pretty early on. And so when they were trying to look at a proxy system, here we had something where we had slavery already baked in, right? Because the House of Representatives reflected the numbers of slaves. And so in the end, using the numbers from the House of Representatives and the Senate seemed like a way to get the South to agree. So the idea was basically you have the state legislature either picks the electors themselves, or they have an election to pick electors. The electors meet in the capital of the state. They make their selection of the person they want to be president, write down the certification, send it to Washington, and so we have this proxy system. So we say, well, we don't have slavery anymore. So that's no longer really a problem with the Electoral College, but unfortunately it continues to be. After slavery was abolished and the African Americans received the right to vote, for about 10 years, 1865 to 1877, there was a period we called Reconstruction. And during that time, 90% of eligible Blacks registered to vote, and they elected Black senators from the South, Black representatives from the South, and their rights to vote were essentially protected by federal troops standing at the polling places, making sure that they weren't harassed or intimidated. The election of 1876 was difficult. It didn't appear that either candidate had a majority of the electoral votes. There was a lot of fraud. There were two different slates certified from several states. But in the end, the electoral, although it was pretty clear that the Democratic candidate, Samuel Tilden, had the most votes, but the situation of the Electoral College was really confused. So the Congress set up a sort of an ad hoc decision-making system, a commission, and the commission awarded all of the contested votes to Rutherford B. Hayes, who then became president. And it's generally accepted that this was as a result of a deal, that the Democrats wouldn't fight this if Hayes removed the troops from the South, and he did. And of course, that was the start of the Jim Crow era. So as a result, because of literacy tests, poll taxes, and violence, hangings, beatings, whatever, the Blacks in the South were not allowed to vote in the southern states. And as I said, 90% of the Blacks eligible were registered in the late 1860s. By 1940, 3% were registered. In other words, 97% of those African Americans were not allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to register and vote. And not until the Civil Rights Acts and Voting Rights Acts, 1864 and 65 came about. So what does this have to do with the Electoral College? Well, because the Electoral College is based on the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives is based on a census, which includes all those Blacks in the South. The South has a number of has power through its white elite. They don't have as many voters as in their population because they were suppressing the vote, but they had the power in the Electoral College because of the numbers. So this is a way that racism still exists in the Electoral College system. The South has never had a single electoral vote for a Black candidate. Let's see. I think we'll skip that one. So racism is a problem. Here, a problem that's is increasingly difficult is that the Electoral College turns losers into winners, right? What a strange process. And Electoral College allows a candidate with fewer votes to win the presidency. A direct popular vote would solve this problem, right? You would just go with the candidate with the most votes. And this is not an abstract problem. It's happened 5 times in our history, which is a substantial number of the 58 elections for president that we've had. That's almost 10%, something like that. So a fair amount of the time, the system goes and selects the loser. Now this makes me mad. I don't know about you, but how can someone who has 3.5 million less votes than the other candidate be named the president? Because of this system and its the ways it's set up. And further defect, some votes count more than others. If you live in Wyoming, your vote counts as much as 4 Florida votes. And this just because of the disproportionate way that the numbers are figured, because there's 2 senators in every state. So Wyoming, with a very few number of people, still has 3 electors, whereas much larger states, their 2 senators are not nearly as big a proportion of the population. So one person, one vote is not the system for the Electoral College. Depends on where you live, how much your vote counts. It just makes me so mad. Just whatever. Okay. Then another thing that has become very obvious in the last few elections is the Electoral College means that the votes count only in a few swing states. Only in 5 or 6 states in every election does it matter whether you vote at all. And the reason for that is, well, because let's take Illinois, right? You're a Democrat in Illinois, and you're thinking about going to vote, and it happens to be raining or snowing or whatever. And you can say to yourself, well, it doesn't matter if I vote because my Democratic candidate is going to win all the votes in Illinois, no matter what I do, which is true, right? It's a solidly Democratic state. You're a Republican voter in Illinois. You might say, well, maybe I won't bother going in to vote because it doesn't matter what I do. The state is going to be blue and Democratic no matter what. And this is essentially the same for 45, 44 other states. They're safely, as they say, safely red or blue. There's only a small number of states where the race could go either way, swing states. And as a result, there's only that small number of states that the presidential candidates care about. That's where they spend their money on advertising. That's where they spend their time. That's where they have events. You haven't heard of a Trump rally in Chicago because they don't care, right? Pennsylvania, on the other hand, has been a very popular place in the last few weeks. So is this right that only 3 or 4 or 5, 6 states, only the voting in that states matter? The system discourages voters because if you're not in a swing state, your incentive to vote is reduced. And the data shows this very clearly that in 2020, the non-swing states averaged 66% voter turnout, swing states 72. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but that's 22 million votes, and clearly 22 million votes could shift an election. So the system is just is built to undermine. I mean, in effect, it undermines democracy because it discourages voting, and it makes it easy to cheat. If you looked at, if you had a direct national popular vote system in 2020, you would count the votes and say, well, Biden has 3.5 million more votes than Trump. He wins, right? And if you wanted to manipulate that through whatever, fraud or whatever, you'd have to get the election officials to change 3.5 million votes. That would be very hard. On the other hand, with the Electoral College, you only needed 38 votes, and you could find them in those 3 states that are shown, and you only needed to change 42,000 votes. You could get, say, 11,000 from Georgia and change the electoral votes in that state from Biden to Trump. Similarly, Arizona and Wisconsin. And we saw an effort to do that, right? And it was all focused on these 3 states and whether there was fraud there, because that's the easy way. The Electoral College shows a roadmap for making the election to switching it or changing it with fraud or whatever. So, any questions so far, Ed? Am I going too
Yes,
fast? That's my major question. Am I going too fast?
there is a question about how people are initially chosen for the Electoral College.
Ah, okay. So originally, when the system was designed by the founders, the idea was that whoever chose the electors, whether it's the state legislature or voters, would choose some well-respected community members who would get together and decide on who was the best person for president. That doesn't happen anymore, right? Everyone who goes into the Electoral College meeting has made a promise of some kind to vote for a specific candidate, and in the primary, each whether you pick the Democratic primary ballot, you would see that there was the different candidates for office, and you could check one. It would say the electors for this candidate. In fact, there would be, I don't know, maybe Illinois maybe has 18 or 19 electors. And if you've been in Illinois for a long time, you may remember an old ballot where you had to check off all 19 of those people, right? And at some point they decided, oh, this is too complicated for people. We'll just put the candidate's name, and it looks like you're voting for them, but in fact you're not. You're voting for the electors that they have selected as being reliable, promise to them, and they've submitted their names to the State Board of Elections to be put on the ballot. So they're party people, generally speaking, kind of maybe a reward or something like that. So they're selected in the primary and general election, but you're only really their names are not there because it was too complicated. We'd make the Electoral College invisible by only looking like you're only voting for the president. So, any questions about that anymore? Okay. So,
Trisha, the question asker said, well, what I really want to know is who specifically are the electors and how were they chosen? But what you might be telling us is it simply doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter, but the party chooses them.
Okay.
The party chooses usually party faithful of some kind or another, and gets enough signatures and submits their name. So it's not a public process, certainly, but it doesn't really matter because they're promised to the candidate.
Yeah. And then somebody else just asked, do the electors have to vote the way the populace voted in that state? I think you said yes, way at the beginning.
The 48 states and the District of Columbia say that the candidate that has won has the most votes gets 100% of the electors. In other words, you have in state A, let's say you have 10 electors, and the vote is 50-50 for candidate A and candidate 1 and candidate 2. One way would be to give 5 votes to one person and 5 votes to the other. But in 48 states, all of the votes go to the person who got 50.1, and none of the votes go to the person who got 49.9.
And this is, I mean, let's say an elector dies before the election. They just appoint somebody else. It doesn't matter.
Right. Maine and Nebraska do it slightly different and have elections in congressional districts that they can pick, the district can pick an elector. But right now, most states have a winner-take-all system. And that's one of the things, that you look at the electoral vote counts, or the 302 versus 260 or 30 or something, it's often very lopsided, very, very much more lopsided than the actual national vote.
So their job is ministerial.
Well, it's not ministerial. There are things like faithless electors
Oh,
who go into the meeting and say, I don't care what you say, I'm not voting for who I said I'd vote for. I'm going to vote for somebody else. And different states handle that differently. Some just let it happen. It happens very, very rarely. Other states have criminal penalties for electors who say they do that, and they just dismiss them on the spot and appoint somebody else who votes the right way. So,
okay.
but generally, the faithless elector idea it's been very, very rare. It just mostly, I suppose, because they pick party faithful to begin with. It happened somewhat in the South, the Dixiecrats and things like that, when the South was changing from Democrat to Republican. But in general, it doesn't matter. They're party faithful. They vote who they're told to vote for. Okay, any other questions?
One more question. Without the Electoral College, would rural areas be represented?
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Okay.
And then Trisha, what if the electoral vote is in fact a tie?
If it is a tie, it goes into the House of Representatives.
And then it's bad news.
And then it's bad news. Yeah. Yeah. Or it could even be not a tie, but just not a majority. There have been times with third-party candidates where that was a possibility. 1968 was probably the last with George Wallace, who had maybe 86 electoral votes, but still didn't prevent a majority. So, but that's one of the problems, is clearly, if you had a third-party candidate like that, clearly send the election into the House of Representatives. And that was Wallace's plan: send it into the House and then exercise their leverage to get a commitment against any kind of civil rights legislation. So why do people say, oh, we need the Electoral College? One idea here is, if we didn't have the Electoral College, rural voters would not count. Let me ask anybody else if you've heard other arguments, and you could just raise your hand or shout it out. It actually is okay. Any other arguments you've heard about keeping the Electoral College? I'll give you a second to think there. Hey, Maureen?
You're muted, Maureen.
Okay, can you
Yep.
hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
I have a question. Because I'm looking at various governmental forms for examples of direct election of the president. And in those, with the exception perhaps of Mexico, and perhaps some of the Latin American countries about which I know not very much, but they are inheritors of the Cadiz Constitutional Convention in the 1820s. Where there is a direct election of the president, that president does not have strong executive powers. A lot of the power of government is vested in the leadership of the prime minister, and the prime minister is not directly elected by voters, but he is elected by members of the legislative bodies.
So you have in a prime minister system, like Britain has,
Yes,
elect a prime minister. They elect party people who select the prime minister. And in that kind of system, the prime minister's position is less stable, right? Because with one vote of his party, and he can be out, and they could have to have a new.
Yes.
So one of the reasons why they did it the way they did here is they wanted some stability. You have a 4-year term, You know, you can't be kicked out by Congress or by the people in your party. So
That's true, but the whole nature of the presidency under our Constitution is different from the presidencies of the other governments where they do have a direct election of the president. So we're talking about two different kinds of power structures
yes,
or
that's-
sovereignty centers within the government. And I'm looking for examples of things that work.
Well, we have France has a presidential election,
Yes, but they have a prime minister.
but the president has significant authority. You know, I tell you what, I'll get together with you afterwards and talk about this
Okay,
because I don't have a whole lot of time left and I have some.
okay, yeah, I know there are other questions.
Okay. Any other questions? So here are some of the common myths, okay? Without the Electoral College, our presidents would be chosen by a few big states like California or New York, okay? The big states would dominate, wouldn't matter what the rest of us did or what the small states did. But as a matter of fact, when you look at the numbers, votes from most or all of the states would be needed to win a presidency by a direct popular vote. So we're looking at this example, which is Barack Obama in 2012. He needed 63.4 million votes to win the popular vote. So let's see, how many votes did he get from California and New York? I don't know if you can see all the numbers here, but he got 12 million from those two states, right? When you add in some more states, you add in the votes. It took 39 states before he had reached a majority. A few big states cannot dominate the election. They don't have the numbers. And of course, in all states, there are Republicans and Democrats. In California, the Democrats get about 2/3 of the vote, but the Republicans get 1/3. So you have to have votes from all or a large number of states in order to win the presidency, which is actually not the case now because all you need right now are the swing states. Okay, so without the Electoral College, the few big cities would dominate, like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. And again, if you look at the numbers, if you took the 50 biggest cities and number 50 is Arlington, Texas. And I must say, I don't think I've ever heard of Arlington, Texas, but apparently it's a big city. That's about 15% of the population. There's 14% is rural, and the vast majority of the population is in suburbs and smaller towns. So cities cannot control the popular vote. And I mean, that's one of the benefits of a popular vote system is the candidates are looking for votes everywhere, okay? They're looking for votes in all the states. They're looking for votes in all these different constituencies, not just concentrating on a few areas in swing states. Okay, so here's one that you frequently hear, which is, well, of course, the Democrats want a national popular vote because they'd always win. And the electoral system is the only way that Republicans are going to control or maintain power. And that's certainly been the case relatively recently. But this is a nonpartisan issue, and we'll look at the 2004 election. So we're talking about Bush and Kerry, right? This was the actual election. Kerry had 251 electoral votes. Bush had 286. And this is the way the map looked in terms of red and blue. In this situation, in the second one, 2004 altered, Kerry has 271 votes and Bush has 266. Now, what's the difference between these two maps? The difference is one state, Ohio. So if approximately 120,000 voters in Ohio had changed their vote, Kerry would have won over Bush, even though Kerry had fewer popular votes. Again, the system would not necessarily pick the winner of the popular vote. So both Republicans and Democrats are at risk in this system, and particularly at risk if there's a third-party candidate who might split the vote and throw it into the House. So myth number 4 is it's just hopeless. We can't do it. It takes a constitutional amendment. It'll never get done. And my first reaction to that is it certainly will never get done if we don't start, right? If you don't ever start, you have no chance of finishing. But a constitutional amendment is a heavy lift, but the Constitution's been amended 27 times. And there often you see these amendments come in sort of clumps, right? There's right after the Constitution was first adopted, there were several amendments to fine-tune it. Amendments around the Civil War, amendments around the Progressive Era in the early 1900s. Suffrage, for instance, or changing the way senators were elected. Amendments during the 1960s, early 70s, for instance, lowering the age of voting from 21 to 18 in federal elections. So this can happen. This can be done. It's just a matter. I think it's a matter of what kind of an effort we're willing to put into it. So what do we need to do? You need a constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendment starts in the Congress. By a 2/3 vote, they have to propose and pass one to the states, 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate. And then it has to be ratified by the states by 3/4 of the vote, which at this time is 38 states. It has to be ratified by the state legislatures, doesn't have to be signed by their governors. So this isn't easy, but I think 900 bills have been introduced into Congress to change the Electoral College one way or another. In 1970, it almost happened. The US House of Representatives voted 338 to 72 passed that, way over 2/3. And then in the Senate, the head count was that there were enough votes to pass in the Senate, but it was filibustered by the Southern Democrats, who could see that if the national popular vote passed, the power of the white Southern elites would be diminished. And for that reason, they opposed it. And so it can be done, and in my opinion, it should be done. And the League of Women Voters is trying to make this happen. We can create a grassroots effort. We can organize where the national has a plan that includes a coordinator from every local league, training people to give this presentation to everyone who will listen, and then to just make it an issue that's important to people. And so that's what we can do. Any other questions?
There is a question, what is the total number of electoral votes? And can someone win by one electoral vote?
The total number is 538, okay? So winning by 270, if you have 538 and you divide it in half, it's 268 or 269, I guess. So 270 is one more than half. So it's a majority. So you need 270 to win. So the number is fixed now because the number in the House of Representatives has been fixed since the 1920s, but it's changed over the course of time from the first elections.
Are there any other national groups working with the League on this effort?
Yes. There are a lot of national groups that have either had this position for a while or have been starting up to support this position. There's Make Every Vote Count, the National Popular Vote. There's an effort it's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact effort. So yes, there are increasing number of groups, the Brennan Center, increasing number of groups that see this as a serious problem. And partly, of course, it's because the 2000 election and the 2016 election tells us how things can go wrong. The 2000 election, we think of sort of as a virtual tie, but it was only a tie in the Electoral College. Gore had 500,000 more votes than Bush in the popular election. It was close in Florida, and that made the tipping point in the Electoral College, and so that's why. We had a loser turned into a winner. Yeah.
As long as we have the filibuster, won't we keep getting the same result that we got in the, what was it, 68 to 70?
You know, the rules of the filibuster could change, for instance.
Okay.
The pressure on Southern senators are all white men anymore, right? They're a more diverse group who might not be as interested in filibustering as
Okay.
was the case in 68.
Okay.
Are there any groups within Congress itself working to promote this?
There are the representatives and senators who have been introducing legislation to abolish the Electoral College every year. Okay, I'm not sure that they have a formal caucus of any kind, but there have been representatives and senators all along who have made this an issue.
While we work on passing a constitutional amendment, will the National State Compact help? It appears many states have already passed that, right? How many more states are needed?
So to start off with a description, an interstate compact is a law that's adopted by states, and they've agreed to do something to cooperate in a certain area. The lottery is a national lottery operated by the states, and it's governed by an interstate compact. Okay, so the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says that when there is a candidate who has a majority of votes, that state will vote in the Electoral College, will certify on the ballots that they send to the President of the Senate, will vote for that candidate, even if he or she was not the candidate who won the popular vote in that state. In other words, if in Illinois, if a Republican had gotten the majority of votes in the election, this law would dictate that Illinois directs its electors to vote for the Republican in the Electoral College. So it's sort of a workaround. It doesn't go into effect until there's 270 electoral votes by the states that have passed it. At the moment, there's 228, which is a significant amount, but those are all the Democratic states that have lined up to pass it. So getting further than 228 is kind of a battle for each additional vote. So there are a lot of problems with this. There are some people who say it's not constitutional. There are no doubt massive lawsuits in waiting if it were actually to occur. But the idea is this is at least simpler than a constitutional amendment.
But Trisha, it doesn't solve the problem of Wyoming getting way more electoral votes than California.
No, it doesn't solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, okay.
But I think I heard a speech by one of the people who proposed this, which were the Amar brothers. One of them was the dean of the Illinois Law School. The other is a law professor at Yale. And they said that what they thought that this did is it raised the discussion in a whole lot of different states. And that if ever got close, it would mean that both Republicans and Democrats have signed on to it in some way, and that it would be much easier than to propose and perhaps pass the constitutional amendment. In other words, I'm not sure they imagine it could possibly be a permanent solution, but it might be a step to the constitutional amendment. So, so a lot of people are working on that. Maine just passed it. Apparently it's close to a vote in Michigan. So there's no deadline. It doesn't go into effect until they've got the majority of votes. So it just keeps adding a few more votes here, a few more electoral college votes here and there. It's, I'm not sure. I think it would be more trouble than it was worth. And it certainly, I mean, I just can't imagine the governor of Texas directing his electors to vote for a Democrat because the Democrat had the national popular vote. It doesn't seem somehow very workable, but at any rate, a lot of people have put a lot of energy into it.
Is it, would it be possible to make the remaining 48 states change their winner takes all policies as Maine and Nebraska already do?
It's not possible to make them do that because the Constitution says state legislatures pick how, they're going to choose their electors. And most of them started with some kind of district election system if they had a popular vote, but went to winner take all as a sort of political matter of maximizing their political impact, right? And specifically, Thomas Jefferson, who was really mad when John Adams was elected president, and there was one elector in Virginia that voted for Adams, and he got Virginia to pass to a winner-take-all system. So that's how long ago these kinds of issues arose. The problem is that for any one state to do this is to diminish their impact. It would need everybody to do that, and not everybody is interested in doing that.
Wouldn't, this is from Maureen, wouldn't this promote unhealthy regionalism?
The interstate compact, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know, you'd need 270. I'm not sure that's not a concern I've heard expressed.
We already have that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there are no other questions, I have a little plea. So we're starting a issues and advocacy team in our local league. We really haven't had a very active issues team. This is the kind of issue that we talk about, but there are other things that, and in an issues team, you might have someone who's interested in environmental law or environmental issues, and they can be a point person. They don't have to actually know a huge amount, but just a point person for our league to to address inquiries about environmental issues and that kind of thing. So I'm looking for people who are interested in either an issue or maybe interested in getting in touch with legislators as a result of action alerts from the state or that kind of thing. So I'm looking for people who would volunteer to be on the issues and advocacy team, and we get together, talk about what it might be like and what you might like to do. So anybody interested can just send me an email. Okay.
One more question. Did the efforts in 2020 to slate false electors make it less likely that there will be such efforts this year?
What I've seen is that if one political party shows a weakness, that nobody ever forgets it, and both sides jump on it with 2 feet every time after. So, certainly in the past, we've had election fraud, and it's not one party or the other. It happens from both sides. So do I think it's less likely? No, I think it's more likely.
I'm sorry, more likely.
More likely that the different defects of the Electoral College system will be mined for trying to change the result.
Oh,
Yeah.
super. Trisha, what email would you like people to use?
T Crowley at 9194 at or T Crowley 9194 at gmail.com, and I can put it in the chat, but I'm not very good at that. Let's see. I'll have to. Or you can look in your membership book, and there's my phone number. So that's what I might do.
Well, I'll put it here. We're going to sign off in just a few minutes, but T Crowley 9194.
94.
I got it.
You got it.
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Thank you.
9194. 9194. Is it really 9194? Or is it 9491? My mind, I've been thinking about this, for days, so my mind is kind of. Anything else?
Hey, it's not right in the chat, Ann. It's 9491.
Okay.
Well, that's in the directory. I'm checking emails Trisha's actually sent me.
Yes, I think you're right. It's 1949 backwards. That's.
Now that messes me up.
9491. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Got it.
Anything else? So what's happening next month? Carol, do you know?
What is happening? I don't know. Carol, do you know? Carol probably knows.
Next month, we have a program on the nursing home crisis in Champaign County. And we have Lynn Barnes, who will be our guest speaker. And the Keeping It Local will be, let me give you the date. It will be November 20th. The nursing home crisis in Champaign County. And there is one, my friends. So, attend and learn more.
Okie doke. Well, I guess we're done. And thank you all for listening to this is an issue that's really dear to my heart. And I think we ought to, really start considering it seriously and trying to work on changing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trisha.
Right.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Trisha.